Like here or here? Like this?
Yeah, by the podium would be nice.
Okay.
Yeah, you kind of feel it here when this comes on.
Oh, perfect.
Now you'll get an idea of what kind of area you have.
You want to be live, let me know. We are streaming and recording, so you never know what's there.
All right. You want to just give it one more minute for people to trickle in, or?
It's up to you.
Yeah, maybe just one more minute and we'll kick off. I don't think I need the full 30 minutes, so. All right. Thanks. I was just going to give an extra minute in case people are still making their way from lunch. All right. Do you want to get started then?
Yeah, you want to go full screen there?
Yeah, let's do it. All right, how's everybody doing today? My name is Vincent Ramirez. I'm a solutions architect with a company called Platform 9. So we're a Silicon Valley-based company out of Sunnyvale, California. The company was formed in 2013 and started shipping product around 2015 timeframe. Our founders are ex-VMware engineers from varying degrees of tenure, ranging from engineer number 19, I believe, before they were actually shipping code at VMware, to later stage offerings at VMware, specific to like vCloud Air and some of the automation suites that have changed names along the way. So our company, just real quick on that, we have a lot of DNA from VMware, and our founders actually saw a lot of turbulence in the enterprise data center space, and specific to the onset of public cloud, and really the game changer that companies like AWS pioneered and brought into the space with on-demand computing, and really this self-service world we're living in now, where IT consumers are really expecting things on demand and not wanting to wait to get a hold of the resources they need to do their job. So our founders set out to solve some of those problems specific to private cloud and hybrid cloud and the challenges they face in the enterprise. And we'll talk about sort of what that means from a Platform 9 perspective and sort of why we exist. Does that sound fair? Just want to set the tone for everybody in the room. Is that something of interest you want to hear for the next 20 minutes? All right. So that's me. I'm visiting from Chicagoland, just outside of the city in a burb, northern Illinois, if anybody's familiar with the area. And today we're focusing on a few things. So in a recent survey, polling top executives in various verticals of IT, trying to get to the heart of what people are interested or focusing on today. Maybe some of this will resonate with some of you in the room or some of your higher ups. But some of the top areas that we're going to call out here, the topics highlighted in blue are things that Platform 9 solutions specifically address. And the ones that are not in blue, there's maybe some indirect relationship to that. So just real quick, hybrid cloud and cost optimization is pretty much top of list for most enterprises, is trying to figure out how to reduce the spend in the data center. Security and compliance is always towards the top of the list. And a lot of focus on private cloud. I think people are starting to see some of the early adopters in public cloud space and some of the pitfalls that are represented there that we'll talk about. Containers have hit the scene pretty hard in the past few years. It's really the next wave of virtualization that a lot of people are trying to figure out or adopt in their environment. Some people are more mature with it, where others are maybe just beginning that journey. And single pane of glass monitoring has actually been a topic in IT for many years. It's surprising that we're still not there, but just we're not. There's just so many tools, and just the journey you go on, especially in an enterprise IT world where you've maintained data centers for many years. It's really hard to accomplish any high-level view into the environment. Other areas that we're focused on would be integrating public clouds into private data centers, so your traditional hybrid architecture and challenges. Developers are now starting to move, some of the bleeding edge developers are starting to look into this whole concept of serverless, if anybody's familiar with that technology that's emerging. And in short, there's still servers, but it's really more of a developer-focused world where they can own the entire stack, from code to the infrastructure that it deploys on, and really abstract any awareness of it. So we actually have a play in that space as well too. And automation for your DevOps initiatives. So really giving those teams that are forming, if you have them in your organization, the tools they need to really scale their activities without traditional IT getting in the way. All right, and a few other topics that may keep your senior leadership, or if any of you are, up at night. It's these days going to be along the lines of unpredictable spend in a public cloud, and this could be as a result of shadow IT or teams going around traditional IT directly into a public cloud. How to remain agile with your applications so that you're able to get to market in time before you miss opportunities. Vendor lock-in is a huge challenge that most people should be aware of and focused on developing a strategy to address. I mean, there's a lot of solutions out here today, and we'll talk about some of those strategies they're implementing to get your business, which can result in some pretty significant lock-in. The time to deploy resources is still a challenge for a lot of enterprises that are managing a private data center, that just the lag, maybe it's through process or compliance, or just old ways of doing things, et cetera. There's still a lot of organizations that are struggling getting their assets deployed in a timely manner. The ease of support, so as we're building these complex systems and platforms, whether they're in our own data center or leveraging a public cloud, it's getting more complex. So how do you support that as it grows and takes on different legs and lives in different geographical areas? And again, resource visibility is top of mind for a lot of enterprise shops. Just the ability to answer questions when they're asked, either through internal audit or external audit. Where are things? Who has access to things? Are we making the best use of our assets? Those sorts of questions. And just the constant journey for workload mobility, whether that be between your private data center and a public cloud or something in between. So really what this all boils down to is what I call the cloud strategy paradox, if you will. Sort of in the sense that a lot of organizations have operated in private data center for many years, and there's a lot of promise of agility and time to market, speed, limitless scalability up here in public cloud offerings. But there's also a lot of just struggles either internal to an enterprise on a number of fronts. So you may have teams forming that say, hey, let's leverage public cloud, let's figure out a plan to just lift and shift out of the data center business and never look back. Where you have some of the other players in the organization that have been responsible for the private data center for many years. A lot of investments have taken place. There's stability in private data centers to a certain degree. And it's not necessarily as simple as saying, let's just figure out how to move it all. So that's really what I'm describing as the paradox, is you've got different schools of thought. There's a lot of fear in this space too of, is my data secure? How do I answer to security? How do I answer to an audit, either internal or external? And how do I keep people engaged? You know, there's fear on the data center side of saying, are you going to do away with my job if you move my workload to the public cloud? Or there's fear over here to say, if we're not agile and moving quickly, getting to market, we're not going to be in business, so what does it matter? I mean, there's so many takes to this argument, but and that's why I'm really calling it a paradox, because we really can't avoid this topic of public cloud and where it fits in an organization, but there's a lot of different sides to the story. There's a lot of factors that have to be considered. And so this is sort of my warning, just from an architecture standpoint, is to say, you know, using a public cloud platform is not a cloud strategy. So I've met people along the way that if you ask, what is the cloud strategy of this organization, they'll say, it's AWS, or it's Azure. And you know, that's kind of, it takes me back a little bit, because I look at that and say, well, that's just a public cloud platform. That's a public cloud offering. It's not a strategy to say, I'm going all in on a particular vendor. So be careful of that as you go down this journey. And really sort of the warning here is to say, if you go all in on a platform, I mean, there's a heavy lift, right? Like each of these clouds here, AWS, Google, Azure, represent proprietary APIs, and they're very different from one another, even though there are elements and offerings and services that overlap. But they're very different ecosystems. So it will result in either sourcing or building the talent necessary internal to consume these resources. And you know, this isn't cheap if anybody's, you know, involved with recruiting or staffing IT talent these days. Finding cloud architects that are proficient in any cloud is challenging. And then, you know, there's also sort of split brain effect here, where you may be good at one cloud but not another. And ultimately, in the public cloud offerings, the one major warning I like to throw out there is, it's one thing to consume IaaS, so just your basic infrastructure as service offerings that they all have. But when you start to get into their PaaS offerings, so any of their proprietary platform as service offerings, such as, you know, managed database services, you know, those sorts of things, you're really starting to look at that lock-in strategy that these companies have developed. So ultimately, you know, these are private companies. They're in business to make money, and their strategy really is to, you know, capture your data and lock you into their platform. So, you know, these are traditional glue boards that you can use to catch mice in your house if you have a problem like that. But I like to use that as an analogy to what a public cloud can represent. If you go full, like head first into one, you can find yourself stuck. Your data's there, and if you start using the, you know, proprietary PaaS offerings that they have, you can really find yourself locked in and have a very hard time leaving if you so choose. And they'll let you upload data all day long, but when you start to download or move your data to another location, the meter starts to drop. So there's things to be careful of there. So just on this topic, I call it, you know, lock-in 2.0. It's no different than what, you know, traditional software companies have done in the past. You know, VMware is a good example of that. They want you to consume their entire stack, and there's a bunch of licensing along the way for them to benefit from the more that you consume. And they don't really want you to use other hypervisors, would be an example. Likewise, you can compare that to companies like Red Hat or Microsoft. So it's really no different here in public cloud. It's just, there's a little more at stake, because your data is now off-premise and it's in another person's data center, another company's data center. All right, so what we're focused on at Platform 9 and some of the products that we're bringing to market today are really about what we call an open cloud strategy. And so by that, we're not saying don't use public clouds, but be mindful of using them in a way that you can always architect your way out of it once you've started to use them. And that's really why we exist, and we have a few products today that are representing the building blocks necessary to start to build that strategy, to say, you know, our strategy isn't a public cloud provider. Our strategy is potentially, we still have private data centers that exist. There's a lot of big iron solutions that may be here, a lot of data, maybe sensitive data, or just non-cloud native applications that don't belong in a public cloud. Sure, leave that there. And then also find a way to use public clouds where it makes sense, but give yourself an abstraction layer, a way to protect yourself from going full in to any public cloud and really treat them as just commodity resources that you can consume. And I'll explain how we're going about that. And ultimately, make your developers and your architects happy, the ones that want to do new cutting edge things. Give them the agility and the technology they need, and then make your executives happy by saying, I can show you how I can reduce costs, I can show you how we can keep our data safe, I can show you how we can be agile and use public cloud when necessary, but I can also show you a way that we're doing it by protecting ourselves from getting locked in along the way. So that's really, in our opinion, what a cloud strategy should represent at its core. So what we're doing at Platform 9, or really the business model that came about, was in trying to solve cloud strategy problems, or cloud mobility and hybrid cloud architecture problems. We looked around, our founders looked around and said, how can we do this? So they looked to the open source community. There's a lot of powerful code out there that even some of the big players, such as Amazon themselves, are consuming, but in a proprietary way, but yet they're still taking from open source code. So what we've done is we're focused on open source projects that are representative of building blocks to help you build this strategy. And the goal of it is to provide an open API set that ultimately your developers can, or your infrastructure architects can automate against or write against once, and then not have to refactor the moment you want to move that workload either from on-premise to a public cloud or vice versa. Right? We should be writing our code once, defining our infrastructure once, and finding a way to abstract the proprietary languages or APIs necessary to put it in different locations. And I'll talk about what tools we're using to do that. And really our goal is to say we want to give you the power to run your workloads wherever makes sense for your business, and whether that's on legacy hypervisors, whether that's in a public cloud, or just on commodity bare metal that you're using to fuel just compute fires in your organization. All right. So big picture of what we're doing here is the technologies at play are, we first went to market with OpenStack. For anybody who's not familiar, that's a open source cloud operating system that was developed by a partnership with NASA and Rackspace. So they were already building clouds at scale and had cloud demand before the likes of AWS ever really hit the scene with their solution. So this project has been maturing for many years and growing stable, but it does have its challenges in the fact that there's a lot of do-it-yourself to it. We're also focused right now in the container space on the Kubernetes project. And so this is the orchestration layer for Docker containers that has risen to the top, even above Docker's own orchestration solution, which was Swarm, or still is Swarm, but they've recently announced that they're going to start supporting Kubernetes, which was it was a project founded by Google and released to the open source as Kubernetes. And over here to the right on the serverless topic, we've actually started, we as in Platform 9 have started a serverless open source project that's incubating at the moment. You can find information about it at fission.io, and what that is sort of our response to the proprietary serverless functions that exist today. So things like AWS Lambda, Google, and Azure Functions. Those serverless protocols are specifically orchestrating proprietary resources, right? If you're going to use Lambda, you're calling AWS resources. If you're using Google Functions, you're calling Google resources. So we're looking to free ourselves and use serverless wherever we want down the road. And so really the goal here is through a hybrid cloud architecture, being able to protect yourself from lock-in, save money by really participating in cloud arbitrage and understanding where workloads should be placed to get the most bang for your buck. And that could either be in a private data center, colo, geographically dispersed data centers, or directly into public clouds. So that's really what we're up to at a high level. All right, so we got our start with OpenStack, and if anybody's not really familiar with that project, some of the key drivers that it aims to solve and can solve in your organization is data center efficiency. It can give you a hybrid cloud architecture and framework through open APIs. and development productivity through self-service. So a lot of legacy software companies have offered self-service catalog type capability, but it was really more like of a catch-up to public cloud. And OpenStack is really kind of a pioneer in the self-service space. So it's really all about carving out resources for a team and letting them just go chew through that until they've run out, and then maybe they have to step back and request more from an ops team. But for the most part, you're freeing them to do what they wish, similar to how they would in a public cloud. And then beyond that, OpenStack will allow you to make decisions around the hypervisor as well too, and get away from having to pay for a hypervisor, which really doesn't exist anymore outside of VMware's ESX. That's I think the only hypervisor you actually pay for. Arguably, you kind of pay for it in Hyper-V by licensing Windows. All right, and then Kubernetes, just kind of hit on that too. So this actually spawned from a project internal to Google known as Borg, which is a very large-scale container orchestration engine that has been running core services at Google for many years, sort of unbeknownst to us. So, for instance, Gmail has been running containerized for many years at scale, and it's highly available. I can't attest to either in my private or business account ever having lost any data in the Gmail service. So, I mean, it's pretty powerful stuff. They, about 2 years ago, launched or helped contribute code that became the Kubernetes project, which has since been maturing and gaining a lot of traction in this space, and specific to taking your containerized workloads and making them highly available, scalable, production ready, that sort of thing. All right, so technology aside, that's all great, but let's talk about numbers, right? Show me the money. So we're on an OpenStack focused use case or business case, step back and through some pricing we did against like a list on, I believe we kind of sampled some super micro gear and HPE for a spectrum of physical x86 compute, and came up with some raw numbers here. So from a public cloud perspective, just focused on strictly infrastructure as a service, we did a little bit of analysis to show that it may be hard for you guys to see, but at a 288 VM workload, M4 large equivalent, so that's a flavor of virtual machine available on Amazon, pretty beefy VM, in a 6U form factor and running Platform 9's software, the equivalent workload would cost, this is all list, but could cost you roughly $840K in either AWS or on-premise with VMware's licensing. So pretty substantial numbers here. I mean, we're talking IaaS, but really you can do a lot with it these days. And then we kind of step up in a couple other scenarios. So this is truly like a non-redundant sort of development use case, just get me some raw compute in the rack. The next step up was sort of like a medium workload use case of 3,800 VMs. Again, all of these are at the M4 flavor or VM size characteristic. And again, as we look at these numbers, we're looking at a $10 million spend in AWS at the time that this was run, $7 million on-prem with VMware, and for Platform 9 with hardware and licensing, 1.6. So pretty significant savings just to deliver a cloud-like experience back to your end users. A lot of Platform 9 customers have originally in the beginning came to Platform 9 just looking to reduce the VMware spend in their environment. And so we're really good at doing that. All right, and then on the farthest end of the spectrum here, that's 46,000 virtual machines. That I don't know that I called it out. The medium was 1 rack worth of gear with redundancy and HA. And then on the far end of the spectrum for 48,000 VMs, that would be 6 racks worth of gear in a data center, either your own or a colo. And look at some of these numbers here, 135 million, 58 million, and then 14 million based on our software model. Okay, any questions on that so far? That's making sense, some savings that can be made. And this has really been in response to people that have early adopters of public cloud that were burned effectively and found themselves shifting workloads that really didn't belong in a public cloud. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. If your workload isn't cloud native, if it doesn't have the characteristics of dynamically spinning up when necessary and scaling down when not, you really don't want to put it into a public cloud and be paying as you go, is sort of the story there. And that was really our response to that with some of this analysis, was saying, do whatever you want with these VMs on Platform 9 because you have a fixed spend. All right, one other analogy I wanted to show from a dollars perspective is Red Hat has a platform as a service offering specific to containers and orchestration of containers. And it is it's a fairly proprietary solution. It has some components of Kubernetes under the hood, but above it, it's really a platform as a service offering that can be deployed on-premise or directly into public cloud. So cost analysis there is really more death by licensing cuts, right? So in this example, this is all list price that came from CDW, so no discounts or anything have been applied, and I know that enterprise agreements exist with organizations, so they're not necessarily paying list price, but just as a point of reference. So Red Hat, to run their OpenShift, typically you're going to need to license your hosts with Red Hat licensing or support licenses for that operating system. Then there's an additional license for the OpenShift support and PaaS offering, as well as, which we're not even calling out here, typically some pretty hefty professional service engagements to get that in place and running. So on the Platform 9 side of the house, we actually provide some freedom to let you choose an operating system that you'd like to operate. That operating system can be Red Hat Linux, and in that case, you would still need to license it. But outside of that, we're just going to have our licensing cost, which is fixed. This is based in physical world on a physical socket, kind of similar to VMware licensing. And professional services doesn't really apply in our world because we have this SaaS model. I'll show you real quick high-level architecture on it, where we can deploy very rapidly and we don't need boots on the ground necessarily. And most of it's done remote and some little bit of prep work in the data center. So as we go down the line, the true savings would be if you were to opt out of a subscription to Red Hat and just go with an open Linux distribution such as CentOS, you can see some drastic savings on the solution and how you can build that out. So this, and we're talking about containers as a service, so there is a little bit of a difference there, but if that's what you're after, that's a pretty clean solution that we're bringing to market. All right, and let me just burn through our architecture for you. I'm not sure if I have architecture folks in the room or not, but just at a high level, the Platform 9 that managed OpenStack offering that we have, the managed part of that means we take what's necessary to build an OpenStack cloud, which is known as the control plane, and we host all of those elements for our customers in public cloud under our control. And then we provide this agent-based deployment model in your private data center in a colo where you can build your OpenStack cloud on your terms. It just needs to communicate out to our control plane securely over port 443. So once we've authorized these nodes, we'll define their role in a public cloud and automatically automate the building of that and then give you visibility into these resources. With it, you can build regions that can be different parts of a data center or different geographical locations such as multiple data centers and control it all with a single unified pane of glass management experience. And Platform 9 is responsible for the validation of that code, so we have to QA our version of OpenStack that we give to our customers, and we'll validate that in-house, and then we stand behind it. So if you have any health events, issues, need iterative fixes, or major releases, which have actually been historically very painful in the OpenStack world, your subscription to our service handles all of that, and we handle the upgrades. All right, we have a architecture that will allow you to front-end an existing VMware environment with OpenStack self-service catalog. So if anybody's VMware-minded here, there's vRealize Automation was really sort of like the self-service project from VMware. And in our case, if you were to go with our product, you could be running KVM hypervisor alongside ESX hypervisor and not have to license the vRealize suite. would be an example of that. And then start to rationalize your workloads and decide, do some of these not belong on ESX? Maybe they don't. Maybe it's just dev stuff, or it's part of a CI/CD pipeline that gets spun up and torn down, and we don't want to pay support for that. You can save a lot of money that way. Just want to mention that that's available. On the Kubernetes front, same thing. We've got this notion of a management plane, which is hosted and consumed in a SaaS-like manner. You would log into our portal. And then on the right, in your own data center, you could prep systems, either physical or virtual, to act as a Kubernetes container or a Docker containervisor that will participate in a Kubernetes cluster. And literally, it's just Linux install our agent, check into the control plane, tell us how big this cluster needs to be, and we'll build it for you. And we're going to push Kubernetes code onto that and take control of it. Give you visibility into it, and then also support the code that you're running through monitoring of the health, iterative fixes, feature enhancements, and then major versioning is all handled through our portal. Any questions on any of this so far? All right, well, I'm right at time, so I was going to do a demo, but I'm kind of up against the wall on time. I want to keep true to the schedule. We are here upstairs at the booth if anybody wants to see any more on the product or has questions about what you've heard or seen today. Any questions before I call it here? All right. Well, thanks for attending. I hope everybody's enjoying the show, and stop by the booth if you have any further questions. Thank you very much.